I've recorded this introduction more than once today. Firstly, I did the usual teaser approach and, letting you all know about how wonderful it is to speak to Warwick and a rundown of the subjects that we covered during our talk. But what I really should have said is just how thought-provoking and profound my conversation with Warwick turned out to be. And if any of you have listened to his podcasts, you will see that it's things are rarely about just horses in life, right? It's all the same. And I think a week has passed now, and on reflection, he really did make me think. And not just about attunement and connection and being present, all of which are very key themes of the interview and are all relevant to us and our horses. But actually, it really made me become introspective and think about where I'm at as a human being. And that sounds pretty big, right? That whole blinding flash of the obvious of where we are and who we are and what we're here to do. But that's honestly what this chat invoked with me. Now, you'll all have your own opinions when you have a listen, and I'm sure it will touch you all in the way that it needs to and will reach the message that you need to hear. You'll hear it. But I just wanted to add that there's something truly humbling about meeting Warwick and learning from him, and having a little snippet of an insight to his life and his thought process and ultimately the journey that he is on and what he's learned along the way that he's been so generous to share with us all over the last couple of years. So yeah, it's a good one. You'll definitely need a cup of tea and a biscuit. Welcome to Curious Equestrian, the podcast where we explore the art, science, and wonder of horse training. So today I'll be your host. I'm Kate Wensley, and we have a very special episode lined up for you. He's not just a trainer, Warwick is a storyteller, a thinker, and a traveller on the road to perpetual learning. Today we're going to delve deep into his current training philosophies, exploring attunement, connection, and whether any of us can see the tree. Welcome, Warwick. Thank you for joining us today on Curious Equestrian.
Hey, thanks, Kate. I'm glad to be here.
We're really pleased to have you over in the UK for the Horsemanship Showcase that's coming up this weekend on the 25th and 26th of November. Are you looking forward to it?
Oh, I'm very excited. I'm looking forward to it a great deal. Not just presenting, getting to hang out with everybody and also watch some of the other presenters when I can get time to.
Yeah, there's definitely a really stellar lineup this year, so it should be a really good show. And I'm sure our listeners will be there in force to watch you in action. So we wanted to talk to you today about a few things, mainly focusing on your journey, not just your personal journey, but also your journey as a trainer. For those of you that don't know, Warwick has his Journey On podcast, which if any of you haven't listened to yet, I seriously suggest that you check out. So following on from the inserts and the excerpts of your life that I've learned along the way there. Firstly, Warwick, I wanted to ask you, can you describe how your training approach has evolved over the years, especially in terms of understanding and connecting with horses? And what changes have you seen in yourself along the way?
Yeah, I'd say the training changed over the years. So I originally came to America in 1990. I wanted to learn about training reining horses. So I grew up as a kid. We showed in all the Western shows in Australia, and you did every event with one horse. It wasn't specialized at all. But the reining in America had started to get really good, and we would see some old VHS tapes of it and stuff, and it was just mind-boggling what they can have those horses do and how they can have them do them. So I was interested in the reining, and I went to the States for a year just to learn a little bit about it because I wanted to train my own horses at home. I actually worked in a bank at the time, and I worked for a trainer for a year, and the day I was leaving, we shook hands on his front veranda, And he said, so if you want to come back, I'll give you a job. He said, you could do this for a living if you wanted to. And I have never really been someone with a lot of self-confidence. And so I'm not like the guy, yeah, I think I can do that for a living. And so I went home for 6 months and I thought about it. And I'd met Robin, who's now my wife. I'd met her in that first year there. And I chased her for a year and she ran like a scalded cat for a year. But after I went home, I think she missed me chasing her around. So she got a little bit nicer to me. Yeah, so I ended up coming back. And so then I was focused on the reining for quite a long time. And we moved back to Australia in 2006. We were there from 2006 to 2010. And while we were in Australia, we took 2 reining stallions with us. And while we were there, both Robin and I were on the board of Reining Australia, which is the governing body of reining in Australia. And there's a big horse expo there called Equitana, and they wrote a letter to the board and said, can someone do a reining demonstration at Equitana? And I was the one who lived pretty much closest to where that was. Some of them lived 24 hours drive away, sort of thing. And so when Equitana heard I was going to go down there and do the reining demo, they asked me, would I be the commentator for, they have a colt starting competition called the Way of the Horse. And so they asked me, would I be the in-arena commentator? And so I did. And then after that weekend, I had a lot of people call me and say, hey, we really liked the way you explain things. Would you like to do some clinics for us? I'd never really thought of doing clinics, but people wanted me to, so I started doing them. So when we moved back to America in the end of 2010, I'd been doing quite a few clinics in Australia. And I had, from doing the clinics, I had a bit of an understanding about the general public's issues they have with their horses. And a lot of times it's because of their outlook on what the horse is doing, things like that. So I started making some YouTube videos, just showing people some simple ways to do things. And by about 2016, I had, I don't know, maybe 15 million views on my YouTube channel, maybe 20, maybe 15, something like that. But so anyway, I'm doing clinics around the world. And I've got this YouTube channel that's going really well. And at the clinics, people bring me in horses and the horses always live better. So I know what I'm doing, don't I? And around that time, my wife bought another reining horse. For people in the UK, Americans don't really get much of this, but for people in the UK, we bought the horse off of Michael Schumacher's wife.
Okay.
No one in America knows who Michael Schumacher is. Mm-hmm. So Karina's really into the reining. And we bought this horse off her. And he had a few issues to where, and for me, they were general horsemanship issues. They weren't reining issues. And at the time, I was thinking, I can fix that. And we bought this horse and there were things about him that I couldn't help him with. Right. And at this point in time, I'm traveling around the world and I'm supposed to know what I'm doing. I've represented Australia at the World Equestrian Games in the reining. I know what I'm doing, supposedly. And I could not train this horse to be better. And so he really got me thinking about looking at things differently. And that was probably 2015 or 16, something like that. And that's kind of was the beginning of my offshoot into the way I look at things now.
This episode is brought to you by Unbridled Connection, the transformative equine journey for those looking to deeply connect with horses and themselves. Set in the mesmerising Scottish borders, this exclusive retreat from the 12th to the 14th of July 2024 is not just a getaway, it's a profound personal growth experience. With only 10 spots, you'll enjoy homemade meals, cosy accommodations, and a restorative 25-minute massage. Our retreat is guided by our friendly experts, Helen O'Hanlon, your personal growth coach. Helen, with her warm approach, holds dual master's degrees in coaching psychology and education. She's excited to guide you on a coaching journey that goes beyond the ordinary. And there's Lindsay Crosby, the inspiring force of With Horses. As a therapeutic riding instructor and behaviourist, Lindsay will lead engaging and hands-on sessions to discover the vital importance of consent in training.
So going back quickly to something that you mentioned, Warwick, comes back to sort of taking opportunities. How does, as you said yourself, being naturally shy, given this opportunity to commentate at a massive event, was there a part of you that said, to yourself, oh, maybe I can't do this? And do you ever reflect and think, if you'd have, it's the hand of fate, isn't it? If you'd have made a different decision, would you be where you are now? I know we're going offshoot just a little bit, but
I don't think it's I don't think it's offshoot at all. I think it's all relative. But no, I said I didn't have a lot of self-confidence. I didn't say I was shy.
okay.
The self-confidence is a lack of belief in your abilities, sort of thing. But the one ability I do have is talking, so I wasn't worried about that bit. They didn't have me starting the cult. They had me talking about the people who were starting the cult. Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, Kate, because everything that's happened that's led me to where we are now came from. So I didn't set out to be a horse trainer. Someone said, you can do this for a living, but I also didn't set out to do clinics or really have an online video platform that would be my major business. That was not the plan. So I was listening to a Tony Robbins thing here a few years ago, and he was talking about, he'd done a previous podcast or something where he talked about 5 things you have to do to be a complete human being or whatever, and then he said, then there's 2 more left, number 6 and number 7, and number 6 is really hard. Number 6 is giving with no thought of getting anything back from it. He says that's where the magic lies. There is a magic to that, but you can't do it. Go, well, I'm going to do this and pretend that I'm not going to get anything back from it, but I'm probably going to, you can't go about it that way. So when I helped out at Equitana and commentated The Way of the Horse, I was thinking, I understand this stuff pretty well. And I think a lot of people, when they're watching something like that, miss all the little details that makes it work. And so I would like to help people understand that. And then, and the same with the clinics. They asked me to do the clinics, and I'm like, okay. But the clinics came about from, I went to Equitana to help, not to help so I get something back from it. And then when we moved back to America and I started doing the YouTube videos, it was basically from the clinics, people struggling with their horses for no reason other than their perspective of what's going on. And so I'm like, oh, I've got some time. I'm going to do some YouTube videos just to help people understand some of these basic concepts about horses. And then I was putting those videos on YouTube too. So they're on like Facebook and YouTube. But at the time, you could not put longer than a 10-minute video on YouTube unless you had a certain number of views. I guess they didn't want you clogging up the airwaves with 3 hours of your cat chasing a laser pointer up and down the hallway or something. And so people wanted longer videos, and I had to find a place to do longer videos. And I found a video hosting site, but they were going to charge me $300 a month to put the videos on there. I thought, I need to charge for this to cover the costs. So that was the start of what's now my main business. But both of those things came about just by trying to help.
And do you think that it was your ability to help the people that really drew you to ending up to helping horses? I've been an instructor and a coach in my time, and I'm terrible at it from the point of view that I know I'm pretty handy with a horse, but my husband will tell you when I try to teach him how to ride, I'm not a very good teacher. So do you think it was your sort of innate, almost talent to be able to explain and break down I'm not even going to say a methodology, just how to understand a horse? And what really drove that? Was it the helping of the people, or the ultimate help that the horse would get with a human that understood it better?
Oh, I think all of the above. When I first came to America and worked for that trainer, so I worked for him for a year, and then when I came back the second time, I worked for him for another 2 years. And he could tell me what to do, but he didn't tell me why it worked, so I didn't really understand it. I could ride well enough to do exactly what he said at the time, but the decision-making process about next time, if it was slightly different, how would I adjust what I was doing? And so I always thought, if I get to where I know what I'm talking about and I'm helping people, I don't want to just tell them what to do. I want to tell them why they're doing what they're doing and how it could be, how you would do it if the process was different, because I feel like I had a hard time understanding training horses when I was being taught to train horses because I was just told what to do. I wasn't, I wasn't given a way of thinking a way of looking at things that would help me in other situations. And so I was really passionate about making sure if I was helping people, they understood it to where they could go home and possibly help their horse in a bit of a different situation.
And going back to the Schumacher reiner that came across your path, do you think that was fortunate in the fact that there's the old adage, isn't there, that when the student is ready, the teacher appears? Do you think that horse then leveled up your understanding and your ability to help people understand horses more by the development, what you took him through and the trouble that you had with him?
Yeah, most certainly. Yeah, he's the master. He's the Zen master, or Sherlock. His name's Sherlock. Yeah, he really, with that horse, like I said, I couldn't train him to be better. And what I eventually figured out that I had to relationship into him being better because he didn't lack for training. He was a very well-trained horse. He was almost too well-trained. That was the problem. Yeah, there was no connection there. And so with him, he was just very obedient, but he was actually quite shut down. So he was quite internal and not one of those internal horses that I hear about all the time. I don't see them very often, but they're one of those horses that they're internal and then suddenly they explode and somebody dies thing. It's not that sort of thing. He stayed internal. But, with him, the problem I had with him was, so in the reining, you get scored on, there's 7 or 8 maneuvers and you get a score for each maneuver. But there's also penalties that can be put in there as well. And so in the reining, anytime a horse is on the wrong lead, it's a 1-point penalty up to a quarter of a circle. Every quarter of a circle is another 1-point penalty, even if it's only one stride. Well, he wouldn't be on the wrong lead, but because running the fast circles, because he was tight, holding it all in, he would get tight, running really fast and bounce his hind feet together for one stride.
Okay.
So that is not the correct lead. Mm-hmm. It's not the wrong lead, but it's not the right lead. And so he'd incur a point penalty every time he did that. Well, he might do it 4 times in a pattern. And so you start out with a 70, and if you could be a 74, you can win most any place you want to go. He would do all the hard stuff well enough to mark a 74, but he'd have 4 penalty points. So he'd be a 70. My wife was showing him. And there's a lot of things you do to try to train them not to bounce their feet together. And a lot of times it's because they are thinking somewhere else. They're thinking towards the gate, things like that. So it gets them a little bit out of balance. They're not thinking exactly the tracks that they're on. Whereas he wasn't somewhere else. He was in his head. His mind wasn't, I wish it could be over there. His mind was, he was really in his head. And so, and I couldn't train that out of him.
Is that when you started, for want of a better word, a different way and looking for that attunement with the horse, or was it a longer process? Did you look inward first of all? I mean, did you try and change anything about how you were approaching him? And I don't just mean from a training point of view, but from day-to-day handling. I think as humans, we find it very difficult to the onus on us. When I've come across a lot of equestrians and people in general, that we live in a very instant fix society. And if they're having an issue with their horse, then it's something with the horse that needs to be addressed. And I think one of the biggest lessons I've personally found following your program and looking more into attunement is actually my part of that relationship. Actually, it is a relationship. It's a conversation. It's a dialogue. It might not be with words, but I need to be present and I need to bring something to it. Was that always with you to an extent, or was there something with Sherlock that helped that click and that hunger to find out how to make the relationship better was ignited by him? Or was it more that it was just a gradual development for yourself, Warwick, that it was a path you were always on and he just helped you along it?
It's a good question, Kate. Yeah, I think it was a path I was always on a little bit, but I wasn't even aware I was on it.
Yeah.
And Sherlock, it wasn't like with Sherlock, what I didn't do, once I figured out I couldn't help him or fix him, so to speak, inverted commas, I stopped trying. It wasn't like, no, I'd kind of realized that he's either going to stay the same or I'm going to have to learn something different, but I'm not going to help change him at all. with the current knowledge I have. And he, if you really boil it all down, in the end, Sherlock made me aware of the fact that I'd been shut down most of my life too. And that kind of came a little bit later. But he got me reading articles and looking at things online that I didn't look at before, what I used to call crazy cat lady training. Like, oh, those people don't know what they're doing. And I got to look, and I wasn't, you said, was I looking for attunement or something? I wasn't looking for connection. I was looking for the reason he was doing the things he was doing. You know, I was driven by, I'd like this horse to be better. And, the connection piece it came along the way. I discovered that's what the holy grail thing that was missing from him and most horses along the way. But what really happened, the thing that really got me thinking about the whole connection piece was probably a year after, probably earlier the next year. Sherlock we got him maybe September of one year, but it was probably March the next year. I'd been reading different things and looking at different things and thinking about things differently. And I was at a clinic in Texas, and there was a girl there that had a Mustang. It was a 3-day clinic, which is interesting because usually I do 2-day clinics, but this one was a 3-day clinic. And at the time, I had a morning group and an afternoon group. And there's a lady in the morning group with a Mustang. His name was Cody. And I don't remember him from the first day. Don't remember anything about him. The second day, we were doing some groundwork in the morning, and Hannah, who owned Cody, she said, "Hey, I got a question. Can you come over here?" She said, "What I want to do is I want to walk down beside him and ask him to step over behind, ask him to disengage behind. But he's blocking me out. What should I do?" And I said, "Oh, let me have a look." And I went over and took the lead rope. And normally what will happen if you are working on that and they start to block you out, what happens is the person's mind's getting ahead of themselves. So their body language, when they go to walk from the front of the horse down the side, the body language tells the horse, "I'm about to ask you to disengage." So they're doing it already. Instead of being able to walk from the front of the horse down beside the horse with a body language and an intention that is just, "I'm going to walk down there." And then you change. That's normally what happens. So I went over and I said, "Let me try." And I went to walk down beside him and he blocked me with his head. So, okay, it wasn't that. It wasn't her body language. He blocked me with his head. And normally if I went to walk down beside a horse and they blocked me with their head, I would just reach my hand under their jaw and just slowly move their head over. Now I'm on that side.
Yeah.
But I didn't. And I'd always done that. But I didn't this time. When he turned and blocked me with his head, I stepped back to my original position in front of him. And I basically communicated to him. I basically said, "You don't want me to do that." Okay. I'm not sure why. But that's not important right now. What's important right now is the fact that you said no. And I'm like, okay, I see you no. And at this point in time, I had no idea why I was doing it, what I was doing. It was just like a hunch. And then I waited in front of him until, his head came back straight again. And I waited till he softened a little bit. I don't know if he started blinking a little bit more. Maybe his ears moved a bit more. He definitely didn't lick and chew. It wasn't like that dramatic. But just looking at a small sign to tell me that whatever concern he'd had just a second ago had gone away. And then, okay, I'll try it again. And I did it again, and he blocked me, and I stepped back. And this went back and forth for probably, 5 or 10 minutes. And then after 5 or 10 minutes, I went to walk down beside him, and he let me.
Okay.
I'm like, cool. So this horse is 9 years old. He's a 9-year-old Mustang, been out of the wild for 6 years. So he was captured when he was 3. He's been ridden for 6 years. So I walked down beside him and I figured he's been ridden for 6 years. I can at least touch him on the withers, couldn't I? So I reached out my hand just to place my hand just on the base of his neck there. But as I did that, I was really watching his eyes and his ears and his mouth and the whole bit. And as my hand reached towards him, he just raised his head up like a centimeter and his eyes stopped blinking. And I went, "Oh, that bothers you." And I pulled my hand back and I waited till he relaxed again. So I went back and forth with my hand like that for 5 or 10 minutes. And after 5 or 10 minutes, now I can put my hand on his withers and he doesn't react. He doesn't freeze. He's down with it. So then I said to Hannah, okay, well, I'm going to ask him to disengage. And I think what's happened here is you've probably overdone this. Like you've asked him to disengage so many times, he's sick of it. So I'm going to ask him to disengage. Then I'm going to go back to the front and he's probably going to block me out again because not that again. So I asked him to disengage, which he did perfectly fine, read my body language. He's been well trained. So I said to Hannah, I'll go back to the front. So I went back to the front and I said, now watch this. he's probably going to block me out. And I walked down beside him. He didn't block me out. I went, that's interesting. I said to Hannah, what I think's happened here is you've just done it too many times, and I'll show you what I mean. What I'm going to do is I'm going to disengage him, go back to the front, come back and disengage him, go back to the front, and I'm going to keep doing it till he starts blocking me out again, just to show you that it was overdoing it that's what caused the problem in the first place. So I go back to the front, come back, disengage, go to the front, come back, disengage. I do it about 10 times, and he lets me every time, and I can't break it. I can't make him not. And I said to Hannah, I have no idea what happened then, but he seems to be better with it. So I handed her the lead rope, and she said, what do you want me to do? And I said, I would just hang with him. And I went and helped somebody else, and about 10 minutes later, there's a collective gasp from all the spectators at the clinic. There's a I turned and looked, expecting to see something dangerous, and Cody has buckled at the knees, dropped to his belly, and he's snoring little dust clouds in the arena dirt. Then he rolls, gets up, has a shake, and boom, down he goes again.
Wow.
And I said to Hannah, is that normal? Because if that's normal, it's not a big deal, is it?
Yeah.
I said, is that normal? She said, I've seen him lay down once in 6 years.
Yeah.
And so I knew right then something had happened. I didn't even know what had happened, but something had happened. He slept till lunchtime. That was about 9:30 in the morning. He slept till lunchtime, and we had to actually wake him up to get the next group to come in. So the Sunday morning when she brings Cody in, she said, what do you want me to do? And I said, I'll just hang on to him and see what happens. So she stands there with him, and about 20 minutes later, boom, down he goes, unconscious, laying out flat, slept for 4 hours.
Wow.
Horses riding around him, the microphone on, people, you know. And so when I came home from that clinic, I knew something had happened. I knew there was a huge change for that horse, and I didn't think I did anything. It was the first time I'd helped a horse. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention that the reason she came to the clinic because she has a random bolting problem.
Okay.
So every once in a while he'll bolt. And the trainer was there too, and she's pretty handy. And I said, so what causes the bolt? She said, the thing is, it could be something that yesterday didn't bother him at all. Like, it's random. And I said, yeah, you don't ever address the bolt. The bolt's not the problem. It's what's causing the bolt. But first you have to figure out what's causing it. And if it's nothing that's consistent, then you're like, oh, I don't know what we're going to do here. So, you know, I said, I really don't have any ideas how to help you with the bolt. But I came home from that clinic and I got on the internet and looked up sleeping habits of horses. Now, we all know horses can sleep standing up or laying down. What I didn't know at the time was horses need to lay down to get REM sleep, and they, like us, they need REM sleep. If you don't get enough REM sleep, in humans, you are either irritable or anxious.
I'd agree with that.
What might cause a horse to bolt? Anxiety. And so, anyway, Cody went home and slept for a week.
Wow.
Like she said, every time she saw him, he was laying down. That was 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. He has not bolted once since.
That's amazing. Now, do you think, just chipping in a thought here, because he was a Mustang and had obviously had a wild existence for the first part of his life, do you think because obviously all our horses, we've got a wild horse in our stable. They're all the same animal. They're just different circumstances. And I think some people make a real differentiation between wild herds and the horses that they have at home, when reality, behaviorally, there isn't much of a difference. Do you think the fact that Cody, having had his formative years, his foundation years of becoming an adult horse in the wild, meant he had more of a, I use the word toolkit, I'm not going to try and humanize them, but had more of a toolkit to communicate what he would and wouldn't tolerate, where his innate behaviors that much more ingrained than they would be for a purely domestic horse, for example. And therefore he was in more of a position to have that very subtle conversation with.
No, I'd probably say no, just because
Okay.
domestic horses have those subtle conversations all the time too. The thing about Mustangs is, or any horse that's been wild and then captured, if you think about when they round them up and they have them in those big yards, if a horse is really overwhelmed, I cannot be here, this is too scary for me, I'm going to try and jump out. They have 6-foot high fences. So they're basically in fight or flight mode, and they're trying to jump out and they can't. Then I think they just switch over into shutdown mode. If you see some of those horses who are upset and restless and worried about being there, they're not so worried that they want to jump out. They're just worried.
Okay.
But I think the ones who are so worried they want to jump out and then they can't, it's okay, fight and flight is not available to me. So the next step is the freeze response. And so I actually think those Mustangs, when you go there and look at some of them in the pens or whatever, and there's the quiet ones, I think the quiet ones are not the quiet ones. I think the quiet ones are the shut down ones, and the anxious ones are they're actually in a better place. They're closer to homeostasis because they haven't gone into that freeze response yet.
No,
That's just my thought on it.
No, that makes perfect sense, Warwick. So leading on from that about nervous systems, obviously we all have one. Our horses do as well. How does working with horses influence or regulate our own nervous systems? Have you observed any significant changes in people who engage regularly with horses and do so in a meaningful way?
Oh, yeah, most certainly. These days, there's a lot of equine-assisted therapy.
Yeah.
But that is done with the purpose of the therapy of the human. And sometimes the horse is not really taken into account. Sometimes it is. More and more these days, I'm seeing that there are people wanting to use horses for therapy, but not use the horse as a tool, use the horse as a part of the thing. But in my experience, helping people with their horses is the therapy. Doing the work is the therapy itself, especially when you get into this whole attunement stuff I'm into now. And, like I remember years ago, I was doing a type of therapy called dialectical behavior therapy for me. And I did individual and group therapy. And in the group therapy, we would have homework every week. They'd send you home with homework. And there was always a mindfulness practice. And they had this big sheet of mindfulness practices that you could choose from. And one of them was closely observe an animal.
Okay.
If your cat's laying on the windowsill and the sun's shining through, look at the sun hitting each individual hair, like on a micro level sort of thing. You're observing on a micro level. A lot of this stuff with, this attunement stuff with horses is you're not doing anything, you're just being very observant. So it's almost parts of it are a form of therapy in themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I personally find it very difficult. It's been a real shift for me to just actually be. And, the whole phrase of being in the moment bandied about quite a lot and being present. I think horses are a great level as I think when we think we're present and then you're actually meaningfully present with the horse, it's very different. One of my trainers actually said to me that most people he meets need some sort of stimulant. He said, I need the exact opposite. And it wasn't until I really started looking at how I behaved around my horses, the speed in which I walked, how I carried myself, what I was thinking, and holding myself accountable, that I really started to see changes. And actually one of them was sleep for my mate. I hadn't seen her lie down until last week. And then we all thought she was dead. She was asleep for about 4 hours. So listening to you talk about what happened makes perfect sense. But I think for humans, we sometimes, in that level of detail, even if you're quite empathic and quite intuitive, I think the whole attunement side of things, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, is a different level of detail. I'm very much a creature of instinct and empathic, and I thought that's where I had my connection with my animals. And I don't doubt for one second that I do. However, the actually being and the attunement and the watching my mare's muzzle twitch slightly and that meaning something and having that level of observation, I've actually found incredibly difficult. How easy do you, maybe easy isn't the right word, how transferring that kind of understanding to your pupils, has that been a challenge as well? Having people understand, one, the difference it can make in their relationship, and two, the attention to detail to themselves that they might.
Great question again, Kate. You said something in there about with your horse, like you starting to be aware of how fast you walk and those sorts of things. And that's self-awareness, and it all starts with self-awareness. And yeah, it is hard for a lot of people. And my mind is as busy as anybody else's. It's not, oh, he's good with horses, he's got old Zan or whatever. But one of the big things I want to touch on, that something you said there made me think about it. I was reading a book recently by a British naturalist, and it was called Being a Human, Adventures in 40,000 Years of Consciousness.
Wow.
And this guy spent quite a bit of time in the north of England living in the forest with his son, like a hunter-gatherer. So whatever you could find, you could eat.
Okay.
They were eating hedgehogs, and I think he didn't eat for 9 days one time, but during that 9 days he didn't eat, he had all sorts of visions, like spiritual visions and stuff. But in there, he was talking about the trees, and he said, I've never really seen a tree. As a matter of fact, it's been a long time since I saw anything. When I look at a tree, the light reflects off the tree, hits my retina, then goes into my brain, and then I start to calculate what kind of tree it is, what species it is. Does it lose its leaves in the wintertime? What funguses does it have? What's its relationship with the mycelium in the ground? And he says, there's this constant analyzing and talking about it. He said, I once met a man who could see a tree. And he scared me so much, I ran away from the temple, took a bus back to Kathmandu and flew home from there. And so what he's talking about here is like when people look at a horse, a lot of times they can't see the horse. You see your perception of the horse, and you see your hopes, your dreams, that you want to canter around on a left lead and go over a jump. You see a lot of stuff, but sometimes we don't see the horse. It's just like another person.
Yeah.
You see all the things, but you don't see the
them.
person, really. And a big part of helping people with horses is telling them stories like that. Like, I'm a bit of a storyteller, but when you hear the story about it, when you like the look on your face when I said, I've never really seen a tree. As a matter of fact, I haven't really seen anything for a long time. Kate looked at me like, what in the hell are you talking about? Not seeing a tree? Are you blind? But I had a horseman named Mark Rashid on the podcast in the first year of my
Oh, yeah. Mark's a friend of ours.
podcast.
So, yeah,
And him and Jim Masterson had just finished a documentary film called A Mind Like Still Water. And Mark says that A Mind Like Still Water is he's a martial artist. He does a martial art called Aikido. But he said a mind like still water is a martial arts term. And it means, he said, when you go out in the morning, if there's a pond and it's early in the morning, the breeze hasn't picked up, when you look at the pond, you get a direct reflection of what's on the other side of the pond. It's an exact reflection. But if you take a pebble and throw it into that pond and make some ripples, you have now changed what that reflection looks like. You've interfered with that reflection. Okay. If you get in the pond and splash around, it's even worse. That the reflection is completely different than it was. And he says, what you're trying to do is have a mind like still water, which is just like being able to see a horse or see a tree, is you see a direct reflection of what's in front of you, not all the stuff that we put into it too. So it can be difficult for a while to do that. But I think a lot of the little stuff that I help people with along the way, it's just a practice, really.
definitely. It's where all bodies of life come together, isn't it? Just touching on, so we were talking about the performance horse industry briefly when you talked about reining, etc. So given your obviously extensive experience, how do you view the current performance horse industry, particularly concerning the balance between attunement to the horse and achieving high performance? I suppose there are a lot of people that, like you say, you look at a horse and you have your hopes, your dreams, your ambitions. For some people, it's rosettes. For some people, it's connection. Do you feel that one can be achieved without compromising your attunement and your relationship with your horse in high performance? And have you seen any really good examples of partnership? There's always Charlotte Desjardins. She's very much a master horsewoman. And that's always how I'd refer to her rather than just a dressage rider.
Right, yeah.
But throughout the performance horse industry, particularly with the quarter horses, etc., because we have a lot of listeners that are that way inclined. I'm one of them. Do you think that you can have performance success and maintain a healthy attunement and relationship with your horse?
I actually think it's a part of it. When I really went down this rabbit hole, I got to thinking about some of the really good reining and cow horse trainers I know in America, and whose horses always look happy. Sometimes people competing at really high levels, their horses are doing the deed, but you can tell they're only doing it to stay out of trouble sort of thing. Whereas some of those, especially older guys, you see their horses going around, their ears are going back and forth, and they got a real soft eye, and they look like they're happy doing their job. And I got to thinking, like, how is that? Because these guys are they're pretty regimented with their horses.
Yeah.
They're pretty strict with their horses. But then the thing I got to understanding is it's the sense of being seen, being heard, feeling felt, getting gotten, as they say. But it's communicating your awareness to them. And if you've ever heard the saying, reward the slightest try,
Yeah.
when you reward the slightest try, not only are you training your horse, you are saying, yes, that little thing you did right there, that's the direction we want to head. You're saying that. But you're also saying, I noticed that little thing you just did.
Yeah.
Okay? I was aware of that little thing. So not only when you reward the slightest try, you're not just rewarding the try, you're also communicating your awareness
And that they're seeing.
of the try. And so they go, oh, you're paying attention to things. And so I realized that guys like that, there's so much of that in their training. But as far as personally these days, I'm not really interested in high performance stuff anymore because I do think that, and this is just me personally, I'm not saying anybody else is doing anything wrong, but for me, I just feel like it's asking more from them than they would probably like to give, especially with any of it, really. But it's a bit like we recently had an intern who was a Marine, just got out of the Marine Corps. Anyway, I said to him, I have a question about the Marines. Everybody thinks the Marines is cool and whatever. I said, but that level of obedience all the time, does that get to you? Would you just like to turn around and tell your drill sergeant to F off sort of thing?
Yeah.
And he looked at me and goes, same day. And I'm like, see, that's the thing. I don't think that's a healthy way to be. Now, maybe to have people protect your country, you've got to have that. But I don't think that's a very healthy way to live. And nobody, you don't see a sign. I don't know I don't know what your version of the Marines is in the UK. What would that be?
It's the Marines. We've got
Yeah,
Marines too.
Okay.
Yeah.
You don't see a roadside sign that says for the Marines and people are spray painting it said those people are bad. Or that's bad for people. But if you think about it, they're high achievers or whatever, the mental health part of it. And that's the big thing on with horses these days is the mental health part of it, mostly because horses have led me on a bit of a mental health journey myself and unraveling some stuff. And I'm really empathetic about that these days. But I'm not saying that people who are competing at high levels are doing anything wrong. The thing I have learned, see, for me, I've been lucky because I've had almost 180-degree shift in the last 7 years. And a lot of times when people have a shift like that, it comes over 30 years. And so they don't notice that they were changing. Hey, I remember not that long ago when I looked at the world a certain way, I was right, damn it. You know what I mean? And you couldn't have told me otherwise. So I don't tend to look at people who view the world the way I used to view the world. I don't look at them adversarially. Oh, they're wrong. Like, hey, I don't think anybody's wrong. I think everybody shows up as the sum total of every experience you've ever had in your life. And no one's ever had the same life. That's why we have different political parties. That's why we have different religions. That's why, how you view the world is the sum total of all of your experiences. And in the horse world, there's a lot of division. You can go to any livery yard and
Yeah, they're fun.
There's 30 people there and there's 30 different ways of doing things and everybody else is wrong. And once you start to understand that everybody's doing the best they can just to survive, and especially when you transfer that over to your horses, you stop looking at horse problems as a problem to fix, but as something to be empathetic towards and something to be curious about. Instead of wanting it to go away, you're curious as to why it's there. And I think that's the beginning of being able to solve issues with horses, is not wanting to fix the damn problem, but being curious about why is this horse behaving this way?
Yeah, and look at it as an opportunity for your own development and learning as well, because I think, like yourself, horses have been my therapists. God love them, for most of my adult life. And they've taught me more about myself than any person could have. And I think there are a lot of our listeners and readers who have horses purely for recreation and connection, partnership, and we see some amazing. In the UK has had, as you know, from the weekend coming up, we've got some great horse men and women in the UK that are very much working towards partnership and harmony, as opposed to and working with a horse's innate nature instead of against it. I like to think about how horses, what we can do for them and with them as opposed to them. When you were talking about mental health, and I actually used to live in a military village. So I've seen the other side of when people, men and women, come out of the forces, and the amount of support that some of them obviously need from that operant conditioning. And as you said, when we talked about therapy horses and the amount of biofeedback they have to provide, there definitely has to be a balance where we're seeing, as you said, like the tree, we're seeing the horse in front of us and what that horse needs. There's I'm not sure if you're aware, Warwick, there's a big thing in this country, particularly at the moment, about social license for horses. So
What is it? What does that mean?
it started with racing and greyhound racing. So it's going down the same route as the greyhound racing did. So it's the 5 domains, behavioral well-being. It's a real focus about we have horses and we can ride them, but should we be riding them? And it's also, there's a very big onus on how we're seen as equestrians by the general public and their perception of how we treat our horses, which is a double-edged sword in a way. One, yes, it's highlighting some incredibly important welfare issues, and one of those being the mental well-being and allowing our horses to live as horses and not just be a tool for a sport. But on the flip side of that, it's also bringing us into the attention where there's a body of people that don't think horses should ever be ridden. And it's what that means for us, especially on the back of the pandemic, where we've lost 250 riding schools in the UK. I think equates to several million riding lessons a year. So it's how to keep, we all love horses. We want them in our life. We want to do it in an ethical and safe and appropriate way, not just for the good of the horse, but the good of the person as well. So with that in mind, I think programs like yourself, the messages that you put out and the training around attunement, I think has come at the best time, having that real understanding for the animal and how they have a say and a voice. I think it's the being a voice for the horse. You're continually sought to learn and develop yourself as a horseman in a trade. What's the biggest significant changes you've seen along the way in your students and your clients? And also, what changes have you really seen in yourself as a horseman?
As far as the changes in people, I've been the cause of a number of divorces. I hear it all the time. I get messages like every day. Doing the stuff that you do with the horses has changed my life. And what's interesting about it is the horse is the catalyst for the whole thing. And a lot of these people say, oh, I get along so much better with my husband or my kids or my co-workers or my boss or whatever. But they might have been married to that guy for 30 years and they haven't done the work to make it better. And that's the great thing about horses is I think people are so passionate about the horses, they will do whatever they have to do to get along better with their horses. And a lot of times that just carries over into the rest of their life. And I'd probably say the biggest thing you get out of it is empathy, really being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. That's one of the big things. When you really see the tree, when you really see the horse, and you can see, and you really start to understand what all the little things mean, what the little movements of their face and their eyes and their ears, what they mean. And you start to read them like you would your partner. Like you don't have to have an argument with your partner for them to, they give you a dirty look and you can fill in the blanks. And I think once you get to where you have that level of understanding of the little things with horses, it changes how you interact with them, but also I think it develops your sense of empathy. But I think the thing about horses, though, is they are so good for us because I was at a retreat, a men's emotional resilience retreat, it was called, a few years ago, and there was a guy there who was he was a fireman. So in America, they're like the first responders. I don't think they are here, are they? You have the paramedics show up first, don't you?
Yeah, it's usually paramedics.
Yeah, so they're the firemen are the paramedics. They're the
Okay.
first on scene. And so he'd seen a lot of things. But anyway, he said, my wife has horses, and she told me one time that horses are a reflection of you. So does that mean if my horse is an arsehole, I'm an arsehole? And I said, no, I don't think they're a direct reflection. I think horses are like this fully evolved being, and they have access to all the parts. So if you don't have access to all the parts, like if, let's say, you're a timid sort of a person, you won't have a timid horse. You'll probably have a bit of a boisterous, pushy horse. If you're an angry sort of a person, you'll probably have a timid horse. So they don't reflect you back to you. They reflect the shadow side of you back to you. But in order to get them...
God, I'm just thinking about the horses I had.
You know what I mean? But so in order to get along better with your horse, a lot of times you've got to go to the place you don't want to go to. And a lot of times the demographic for what I do is like 35 to 65-year-old women with a big point in the middle, at about 50 sort of thing. And it goes out from there too, but that's the main demographic. And then there's probably, on the other side, there's probably 5% of it is men in the same demographic. But a lot of times the one thing people have a hard time in that demographic has a hard time doing is giving up control.
Okay.
And I talk about having faith in horses, and I say, in order to get along with horses, you have to give up control. Okay? You really have to be able to give up control. And when you can give up control, it tells them that you have faith in them.
Right.
And once they realize you have faith in them, then they can start to have faith in you. But in order to give up control, you have to have your preparation right. In order to stay safe, giving up control with a 1,000-pound animal, you have to have your preparation right. So you have to have faith in your preparation. So inevitably, it comes down to you having faith in you.
Oh. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I can imagine that can be quite uncomfortable. But generally, learning is never comfortable at times. For real growth and learning.
But see, that's where I see a lot of huge changes is people with their horses who've spent all their life trying to control their horse, and when they have problems, and then they give up control, and when they do, the problem goes away.
Yeah.
They solve the problem by giving up control. Then they realize trying to control everything in the first place was causing the problem. And the outlook that causes you to try to keep control of everything in the first place was causing the problem. So then you get to change your outlook.
Do you find in a lot of circumstances that actually the need for control is actually based in fear?
Oh, yeah, most certainly. Yeah. And so then a lot of times people have to push through that fear to be able to let go of control. And the key is you've got to find, working with horses or humans that are fearful, you've got to find the entry point.
Okay.
You've got to find the point to where, what is just outside your comfort zone? Can you go there and then come back in?
Okay.
That's the thing, is you've got to find the edge of the comfort zone and you've got to play with that. You don't just steamroller over it, because then they tend to go into shutdown mode sort of thing. So the place there, you've got to just be able to play with that, the edge of their comfort zone.
Okay. And that's not always easy to do as well, isn't it? For a long time, especially in this country, we were advised to just on and ride. I'm sure that's a universal historic truth throughout equestrianism. And it was you just get back on the, that saying, isn't it? Get back on the horse. And actually, I think it takes a much braver person to actually sit with that discomfort and, like you say, play with the boundaries of fear, or boundaries of their limits, because that's the only way you're ever going to expand it.
Yeah, and you got to figure out where that fear is coming from. Like you're talking about, get back on the horse. Is it the fear of all the other people at your livery going to laugh at you if you don't get back on your horse? What is that
driver?
Yeah, what is that driver? What is the thing that's causing that?
That's really interesting. Thank you so much, Warwick. What are you hoping to bring to the spectators of the showcase this weekend? What have we got to look forward to?
So I've done two demos with a horse, one Saturday, one Sunday. And the horse that I found a horse that he's a Welsh Section D, and he has a long list of things, wants to pull away from you. Like, you can't drive him in driving lines because he doesn't like anything near his back legs. And if you throw anything over him, he runs off. And they've tried riding him and he bucks them off. But I want to find the entry point with this horse. So what I'm going to plan on doing is turn this horse loose in the arena. And I have it on good advice. He's just going to run away from me, which is good. And I've done this quite a bit at horse expos. And then just through communicating my awareness of his awareness, so not putting pressure on him or not using treats or anything, usually by the end of the session, they come over and not only want to hang out with me, but will be like a liberty horse. And wherever you walk around, they come with you with no halter or anything on them. And it's all done through attunement. And so the thing I want people to get out of this demo is, wow, he got all that done with that horse who doesn't want to be around people. And the only thing he did was work on attunement. Then they can go home and go, wow, that is way more important to a horse than I thought it was.
It's sparking their curiosity, not just the horse.
Yeah, and it's usually a pretty impactful demo because I'm not really doing anything, and I've usually got a horse that looks like it's quite a bit of a problem, and at the end it's not. But I didn't really do much. And so the thing is, you talked about earlier on. You were talking about being around a horse and wanting to do things. You know, you end up being a human doing and not a human being.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of being around horses that, you know, horses in herds spend lots of time together. Okay, and that's the thing is, and it's the same in human relationships. People get a horse and the first thing they want to do is what they want. Okay. That's like meeting someone for the first time and saying, hey, can you lend me £100? Hello, I'm Warwick. Shake hands. Hello, I'm Warwick. Can you lend me £100? Okay. You don't do that in human relationships. With horse relationships, I want to get you and I want to ride you. The first thing I want is something from you. Mm-hmm. And so it tells them a lot about you. And so there's a lot that goes into any relationship, and horse relationships are no different.
Yeah, it's the actual putting in before you ask for anything out. And I suppose it's not really even asking for anything out. It's just that mutual give and take that happens with time.
Yeah, and eventually you can ask for things. You can ask for lots of things. A number of years ago, when I was first having this bit of a shift in my thoughts, I read a book called Equestrian. And I got halfway through that book and I put it down and I said, if I finish this book, I probably will not ride horses ever again.
Really?
And so I put the book down. And I have mentioned on my podcast a couple of times that's what happened. And I've had a number of people email me and say, the way you look at the world now, read the rest of the book. You'll be just fine riding horses with the current worldview you have.
Yes. So that's definitely one that you'll need to pick up again when you get
I don't know if I need to pick it up, but I needed to read it at the time. Mm-hmm. And it really came at things from the horse's point of view. But so the demo I'm doing here at the Horsemanship Showcase, the demo I'm doing will show you that horses actually do want to do things with us. That's the big thing I'm trying to do, is you don't have to coerce them into doing things. If you can go about the right way, they want to do things with us.
Yeah, which is pretty amazing, really.
Yeah.
It's when you give them a choice, isn't it?
Yeah.
And like you say, it's seeing the tree.
Yeah.
Being the horse. Thank you very much, Warwick. You've been an absolute pleasure. And if anyone wants to find out more about Warwick Schiller, visit warwickschiller.com and be sure to check out the Journey On podcast. It's definitely worth a listen. It's been amazing.
Thanks, Kate. It's been a pleasure.